Have you ever wondered what could happen if there was a prayer so powerful, so life-changing, that leaders and authorities decided it should never be spoken again? What if I told you this prayer not only exists, but ordinary people, men and women just like you, have already experienced miracles that defy every human explanation? This is not the kind of prayer you hear about in Sunday sermons. It's not printed in the popular devotionals stacked on bookstore shelves. This is a hidden spiritual key, passed down quietly from generation to generation. A key that once turned opens doors no man can shut. Think about it. How many times have you knelt down, poured your heart out before God, wept until your voice broke, and felt like heaven was silent? How many nights have you stared at the ceiling in the dark, wondering, Lord, do you still hear me? What if I told you there is something that changes that silence into an answer, a way to turn long, weary prayers into a living, breathing encounter with the power of God? Words that not only reach his ears, but touch his heart. This story begins quietly, but as with every divine plan, the quiet soon becomes extraordinary. For decades, this secret prayer was shared only from one believer to another, whispered like a treasure too precious to risk falling into the wrong hands. Not because it was dangerous in a worldly sense, but because its purity and power could be twisted by selfish hearts. The Bible tells us that God often hides his treasures for a set time. Jesus himself said, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of God, but for others they are in parables." Luke 8:10. This is one of those secrets, and today you are about to be led into it. Picture this: an old rural chapel in the heart of America, sunlight streaming through fractured stained glass windows, beams of gold and blue cutting through the dust in the air. At the center stands a stone altar. Resting upon it, an open Bible. Light seems to rise from its pages as if the words themselves were alive. Around it, men and women of every age stand with eyes closed and hands lifted, tears sliding down their cheeks. There is no music, no preacher's voice, only the unmistakable, overwhelming presence of God filling every inch of the room. And this is where the 7-minute prayer comes in. Not a magic formula, not a hollow chant, but an intimate conversation with the Creator, so personal, so honest, that time itself feels like it stops. It is as if heaven bends low, leaning in to hear every syllable, every breath, every tear. You might be asking yourself, if this prayer is so beautiful, so holy, why would anyone forbid it? Why keep millions of Christians from a key that unlocks such deep communion with the Father? The answer to that question is exactly what makes this story so shocking. Before I tell you how this prayer transformed lives literally overnight, I need you to prepare yourself. What you're about to hear may challenge what you thought you knew about the power of prayer, because what comes next may change the way you kneel before God for the rest of your life. And right now, before we take the next step in this story, I want to invite you into something deeper. We are not just telling a story here. We are building a circle of faith. I believe in the power of believers coming together, even across miles, even through a screen, to pray for one another. If you need a breakthrough in your life, whether it's for your health, your finances, your family, or your faith, write your prayer request in the comments below. Don't hold back. Be specific. This is a space where people from all over will be lifting each other up before God. And I promise you this, I will be joining you in prayer. I've seen it happen over and over. When even 2 or 3 come together in agreement, the atmosphere shifts. The Bible tells us that the prayers of the righteous are powerful and effective. So let this be more than just a video you watch. Let it be a moment where heaven takes notice because we chose to stand together in faith. While you're here, if this message has already stirred something in your heart, take a moment to hit the like button. It may seem small, but it helps this message reach more people who need hope right now. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on all notifications. That way, you won't miss the next part of this journey, because what's coming is going to shake you in the best way possible. We are just getting started, and the moment you hear what happened when this prayer was spoken aloud, you'll understand why it could never be hidden forever. They said this prayer should never be spoken again. Whispers passed through small towns. Quiet warnings traded between pastors and elders. Don't let this leave these walls. But a group of believers dared to defy the order, and in just 7 minutes, the impossible happened. Picture it, a forgotten chapel on the edge of a dusty Midwestern town. The wood is old, the air smells of rain and stone. Broken stained glass windows scatter light across the pews in fractured rainbows. Dust hangs in the air like suspended time, and through it, golden beams cut down from the heavens, wrapping themselves around the people inside. Men and women are on their knees. Some are weeping silently, others gripping worn Bibles with white-knuckled faith. This prayer, this banned prayer, was once known in tight-knit communities across the United States in the late 1800s. It was spoken in quiet parlors and small country churches, often passed from parent to child in a hushed tone, as though each word carried the weight of eternity. But somewhere along the way, it vanished. Not because it lost its power. No, it vanished because certain leaders decided it was too dangerous to be shared publicly. Dangerous? How could a prayer be dangerous? That's the question that haunts anyone who hears about it. But if you've ever experienced a real faith breakthrough, you know, when the Spirit moves, it shakes everything. Sometimes it shakes the wrong people. The truth is, this miracle prayer wasn't dangerous because of superstition. It was dangerous because it worked. Because in 7 short minutes, less time than it takes to brew a pot of coffee, lives were changing, debts were cleared overnight. Marriages on the brink of collapse were suddenly restored. People who hadn't walked in years were standing. Those who had lost all hope found themselves flooded with peace that defied explanation, the kind of divine intervention that doesn't just touch one life, but ripples through entire communities. And when something like that happens, you can't control it. No man, no institution, no system can dictate where that river of blessing will flow, and that's exactly why some try to dam it up. But here's the thing about rivers: they find a way. Quietly over the decades, the prayer was kept alive by those who had tasted its power, slipped into the back pages of worn family Bibles, memorized in secret, whispered between believers who trusted each other enough to share something so sacred. Today, we are breaking that silence. Not to provoke rebellion, not to disrespect tradition, but because if even one life could be saved, if even one soul could be brought back to God through this, it would be worth every risk. I want you to imagine for a moment what could happen in your own life if for 7 minutes heaven bent down to listen, if in those 7 minutes the God who spoke the universe into being decided to speak directly to you. What would you ask? What would you release? What would you surrender? I can tell you this: what you're about to hear is not a magic formula. It's not a ritual, it's an encounter. And once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. Once you've prayed it, you will never again pray the same way. Before we go further, I need you to do something. This is not just about listening. This is about standing together in faith. In the comments, write these exact words: 7 minutes can change everything. Not just so I can see it, but so you are putting your faith into action before you even hear the full story. And if you're ready to see what God can do in 7 minutes, stay with me, because what happened next will shake you to your core. Her name was Sarah Miller, a single mother, a nurse in a small Texas town, and the kind of woman who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders for far too long. Life had not been kind. Her marriage had crumbled under the pressure of financial strain. The bills stacked higher than her kitchen table. Her health, once strong, was beginning to falter from the endless night shifts and the stress of simply surviving. Most days, she woke up with a heaviness in her chest, a silent question echoing in her mind: how much longer can I keep going? Her faith had not vanished, but it was buried under years of unanswered prayers, silent nights, and the quiet ache of feeling forgotten by God. It was on one of those long, weary mornings, before the sun had even broken the horizon, that Sarah met Pastor James. He was an old man now, retired from ministry, with hands weathered like the pages of the Bible he carried. They crossed paths in the dimly lit hallway of the small clinic where Sarah worked. He had come in for a routine checkup, but before leaving, he pressed something into her hand, a folded piece of yellowed paper, worn soft from decades of being handled. On it, in neat but fading handwriting, were the words to what he called the 7-minute prayer. Alongside the words, he gave her one simple instruction: pray these words every day, exactly at 7 a.m. Don't be late, not even by a minute, and never, never tell anyone what you feel during those 7 minutes. Sarah almost laughed. She had prayed before, countless times, but 7 minutes? It sounded too simple to be the answer to the storm she was living in. Still, there was something in his eyes, an urgency, a quiet authority that made her promise she would do it. The next morning, Sarah set her alarm for 6:55 a.m. She made her coffee, sat in the same worn chair by her kitchen window, and waited. When the clock struck exactly 7, she began. The first day felt ordinary. Her mind wandered to her bills, to her shift later that evening, but she kept going. By the third day, something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like the faintest scent of rain on dry ground. A peace she couldn't explain began to settle over her. She noticed she wasn't waking up with the same tightness in her chest. By the 7th day, things started to happen. Out of nowhere, a hospital from a nearby city called to offer her a nursing position. Better pay, fewer hours, and full benefits. She hadn't even applied. That same afternoon, her doctor called to tell her that the alarming results from her last medical tests were wrong, completely wrong. The diagnosis she feared was gone. And then came the change she hadn't dared hope for. Her teenage daughter, Emily, distant for years, angry and cold, walked into the kitchen one evening and without a word, hugged her, just held her, as if some invisible wall between them had crumbled. Sarah kept praying, every morning at 7 a.m., without fail. Each day she wrote in a small notebook the things she was thankful for, the blessings that seemed to appear out of nowhere. And every day, the weight she had carried for years grew lighter. Now some would call this coincidence, a streak of good luck. But deep down, Sarah knew better. She knew what it felt like when God's hand moves in your life, when divine timing weaves together the impossible. And she began to wonder, if this prayer could transform her life so quickly, how many others could be set free if they knew it existed? But that was the question, the dangerous question. Because as she would soon discover, not everyone wanted this prayer to be known, and the reasons why mine were darker than she could have imagined. At first, Sarah kept the 7-minute prayer to herself. It was too personal, too intimate, a holy meeting place between her and God that she didn't want to dilute with careless words. But miracles have a way of speaking for themselves. People noticed the change in her. Neighbors who had seen her drag herself to work now saw her with a light in her eyes. Friends who had watched her struggle for years began to ask, "What happened to you?" At first, she hesitated. But one afternoon, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, she told her next-door neighbor, Linda, the truth. She explained the exact moment the prayer had entered her life, the instructions the old pastor had given her, and the 7-minute window that changed everything. Linda was skeptical, but agreed to try it. Within a week, Linda's husband, long estranged and living in another state, called to ask for forgiveness. Her youngest son, who had been in trouble at school for years, came home with his first glowing report card, and just like that, word began to spread. Soon, Sarah found herself in the small back room of the local library, sitting with 6 other women, all clutching handwritten copies of the prayer. They prayed together at exactly 7 a.m., their voices weaving through the silence like threads of gold. Over the next few weeks, more joined. The town's mechanic, the post office clerk, even the retired sheriff. And with each new person, the stories multiplied, debts erased, illnesses reversed, broken families restored. It was as if a spiritual wildfire had been set loose. But then, the shadows came. It started subtly, a cold glance from the pastor of the largest church in town when Sarah walked into the grocery store, a whispered conversation that went silent the moment she stepped into the diner. Then came the Sunday sermon, though no names were mentioned, warning against dangerous and unauthorized spiritual practices. Within days, anonymous letters began arriving at her door. The handwriting varied, but the message was the same. Stop now, before it's too late. Some were polite, others venomous. One simply read, "God doesn't need you to rewrite his way." Then the rumors began to grow louder. Someone left a clipping from the local paper in her mailbox. An old headline from decades ago, "Community split after use of prohibited prayer." The article described a similar revival in a neighboring town that had ended in bitter division and church closures. Sarah couldn't understand it. How could something born from scripture, rooted in pure devotion, be twisted into something dangerous in the eyes of others? But she began to see the pattern. The more lives changed, the more resistance grew. There were whispers of council meetings behind closed doors. Friends she had known for years stopped returning her calls. Linda told her she had been pulled aside at work and warned to stay away from that group. It was as though an invisible wall was being built around them, cutting them off from the rest of the town. And yet, the hunger for the prayer only deepened. Those who heard the warnings seemed even more determined to try it. People drove in from neighboring counties. Strangers showed up on Sarah's porch at dawn, asking if they could join her. The very attempt to bury the prayer had made it impossible to ignore. Sarah felt torn. She didn't want to cause division. She didn't want her community to fracture, but she also couldn't deny the power she had seen. Lives were being restored, not by her, not by any person, but by the hand of God, moving in ways she had never seen before. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the opposition wasn't just human. Theirs felt bigger, as if forces beyond this world were desperate to silence something they could not control. If you were in Sarah's place, what would you do? Would you keep it hidden to protect the peace, or would you reveal it to the world, no matter the cost? Write your answer in the comments right now, just one word. Revelar if you would share it, or Iskonder if you would keep it hidden. It happened on a Tuesday. The sun was just beginning to stretch its first pale light across the horizon when Sarah unlocked the heavy wooden doors of the abandoned cathedral. The building had stood silent for decades, its stone walls weathered, its bell tower leaning slightly, like an old man who had seen too much of life. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of dust, candle wax, and rainwater that had leaked in through the broken roof. She hadn't invited them, not formally, but word had spread, quietly, like a secret too good to keep. That morning, as the clock neared 7, they began to arrive, one by one. Farmers in worn boots, young mothers holding their children close, retirees clutching old leather Bibles, people who had driven through the night just to be there. By the time the hour struck, there were 47 souls gathered in that forgotten sanctuary, and then it began. Sarah's voice was soft at first, her words carrying through the space like a whisper to the heavens. The others joined in, their voices weaving together into a single, unified cry. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rehearsed, but the unity of it, the raw honesty, made the air itself feel alive. The morning light pushed through the shattered stained glass, casting rivers of gold and crimson across the floor. Dust floated in slow, deliberate patterns, as if suspended by something unseen. A warmth began to spread, not from the old rusted radiators, but from within. Some later said they felt a hand on their shoulder. Others swore they saw the light bend, wrapping around people like an embrace. And then, the tears came. They weren't the kind of tears that come from sadness. These were the kind that fall when chains break. Men who had carried decades of guilt sank to their knees, sobbing. Women who had been holding their families together with sheer will fell into the arms of strangers, their voices trembling with gratitude. Some prayed in whispers, others in silence. But every single person felt it. Something holy was happening. When the prayer ended, no one moved for several minutes. It was as if they were afraid that speaking would shatter the atmosphere. Finally, one man, John the mechanic, stood and cleared his throat. He told them how just the day before, the bank had called to inform him that his debt, which had hung over him for years, was cleared. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice breaking. "I still don't know how." Another woman shared that she had been scheduled for surgery after years of pain, but woke that morning completely free of it. A teenager, eyes wide, said that after praying yesterday, his father, who had abandoned the family, called to say he was coming home. By the end of the week, the stories had multiplied. A man who had been unemployed for months was offered a job he never applied for. A marriage everyone thought was beyond saving began to heal. Bills were mysteriously paid. Doctors' reports came back clean. People began speaking of an overnight transformation sweeping through the town. This was more than just answered prayers. It was a wave, a divine revival that seemed unstoppable. The prayer, once hidden, once whispered in secret, had become the heartbeat of a growing movement. Those 47 people had tapped into something far greater than themselves. They had accessed a well that had been buried deep, and the water was spilling out faster than anyone could contain it. And now there was no going back. The prayer had been whispered through generations, carried like a fragile flame through storms of doubt, resistance, and even outright persecution. And now here it was, spoken aloud, filling the walls of an abandoned cathedral and spilling into the streets of a town that would never be the same again. The 7-minute prayer was never just about prosperity. Yes, people saw debts erased, jobs appear, and homes restored. But the true miracle ran deeper. It was about freedom, the kind of freedom no system, no institution, no enemy could take away. It was about shaking the chains from a weary heart, about awakening something ancient and holy that had been lying dormant inside every person bold enough to speak those words. Sarah understood this now. She had seen it in the eyes of her neighbors, in the tear-streaked faces of strangers who came to her door at dawn asking to join her. She had heard it in the trembling voices of men and women who shared their testimonies, each one a thread in a growing tapestry of divine intervention. And yet, she knew they were still walking on dangerous ground. The more the prayer spread, the more determined the opposition became. She had received phone calls from numbers she didn't recognize, the line silent until she hung up. She had caught glimpses of unfamiliar cars parked at the end of her street, but the people refused to stop. At 7 a.m. each day, the hum of whispered prayer seemed to rise from every corner of the town. In kitchens, on porches, in hospital rooms and office cubicles, 47 voices had become hundreds, and hundreds were becoming thousands. And then came the day that Sarah would never forget. It was a cold morning, frost on the windows, the air so crisp it seemed to crackle. Sarah stood once again inside the cathedral, now repaired in places where the roof had once leaked. This time, it wasn't just 47 people. The pews were full. People stood along the walls, some even kneeling in the aisles. The moment the prayer began, a warmth spread through the space like a living presence. It was as if heaven itself had decided to step into the room. Some wept quietly. Others fell to their knees, overwhelmed. One woman shouted, "I'm healed," and lifted her hands, her voice breaking with gratitude. In that moment, Sarah knew this was no longer a secret movement. This was a revival, and that's when she realized something else. The prayer, powerful as it was, might only be the beginning, because Pastor James had told her something long ago that she had almost forgotten. In his study, hidden in the back of an old leather-bound Bible, there was a page marked with red ink. On it were the faint hand-copied words of a psalm, one she had never seen in any printed Bible. He had told her it was never meant for public eyes, not because it was false, but because those who truly understood it could unlock something far greater than financial blessing. They could step into a level of spiritual abundance that few had ever tasted. Some called it the biblical prosperity key. Others referred to it in hushed tones as the divine wealth secret. Pastor James called it simply the hidden psalm. Sarah had never dared to read it aloud. Until now, her hand trembled as she pulled the folded page from her coat pocket. She looked out over the crowd, their faces expectant, their hearts open. She knew that speaking what was on that page could change everything again, maybe even more than the 7-minute prayer had, but it could also bring a storm unlike anything they had faced before. And in that moment, a thought passed through her mind. Some things are too powerful to remain hidden forever. In the next video, you're going to hear that psalm for the first time, the one that was banned because they believed it could unlock divine wealth, the one buried deep in scripture, hidden from plain sight, and guarded for generations. Its name. This hidden psalm was banned for unlocking divine wealth. What's inside it could shatter your understanding of God's provision and open doors you never thought possible. Before we step into that, I want to know your heart on this. If this prayer, if this truth were freely available to everyone, would you use it? Would you dare to speak it aloud, knowing the power it carries? Write your answer in the comments right now. Just one word. Sim, if you would use it, or no, if you would not. Because what's coming next will demand a decision. If at any moment during this video you felt the voice of God speaking to you, don't ignore it. That's not an accident. That's a calling. Subscribe to this channel right now, because this is only the beginning of a journey that will strengthen your faith and transform your life forever. And if you made it all the way to the end, I want you to write this exact phrase in the comments. I heard the voice of God. That's how I'll know you are part of this family of faith, people who don't just watch, but live every word. Hit that like button right now, so this message can reach more lives that need hope. And don't leave without clicking on the next video already on your screen, because in it, we're going to uncover truths that have been hidden for centuries, and they could change everything for you.